Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. So the entire list of the Elven Empire Precon with Lathril at the helm has been revealed. And today I'm going to be walking you through some fantastic upgrade options for the deck. So if you're looking to pick up this deck and power it up, this should help. I'm also going to be breaking the upgrades down into different budget tiers. I realize that many players have different budgets when it comes to Magic, so I hope this is helpful. But with all that said, let's jump into it. So the commander for the Elven Empire Precon deck is Lathril, Blade of the Elves. She's a 2/3 elf noble with menace that costs 2 black-green. And whenever she deals combat damage to a player, you create that many 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens. You can also tap her to tap 10 untapped elves you control, and each opponent loses 10 life and you gain 10 life. So Lathril is an elf tribal commander with a lot of flexibility. You can take her in a couple of different directions, including elf tribal, or tokens, or even Voltron. And of course there are different upgrades to consider depending on which direction that you want to take her. So if you're already considering a certain direction, make sure you keep that in mind as you evaluate these upgrades. Obviously, some of these upgrades are going to work better for one direction than another. And depending on your playstyle and depending on your meta, you might favor one upgrade over another. But now let's get started with some budget-friendly upgrade options that are each less than $2. Personally, I found in building my own budget decks that if a card is less than $2, it usually can fit into the budget. So let's start with some one-drop elves to consider with Llanowar Elves, Finehorn Elves, and Arbor Elf. For this deck's purposes, each are essentially the exact same card. They're all 1/1 elf druids that cost a green. Llanowar Elves and Finehorn Elves tap for a green, and Arbor Elf taps to untap target forest. Now if you've got a dual land in play, obviously Arbor Elf can help you in a different way, but most of the time you're just going to be using it to basically tap for a green. Adding these into this precon can really help speed up this deck. They not only lower your mana curve, but they help you ramp right away. And again, the quicker that you can get elves out for this deck, the better. And at their price points, they're easy budget includes. Next up though, let's talk about Elves of Deep Shadow, which is also a 1/1 elf druid for a green, but it's going to tap for a black, and then it deals 1 damage to us. So like those other elves, it does help us ramp early, but it also fixes our mana, though that does come at a small price. 1 damage is basically nothing in a game of Commander, so it's going to be well worth it. And at $1.08, you usually can find room for it in the budget. And then Gnarlroot Trapper is somewhat similar. It's a 1/1 elf druid that costs a black, and you can tap it to pay 1 life and add green to your mana pool, but you can only spend this mana to cast an elf spell. You can also tap it to make target attacking elf you control gain Death Touch until end of turn. So this is a flexible elf that we can get down early. It can help us cast other elf spells that can help get elves through. This can be especially effective with Lathril since she has Menace. If we give her Death Touch, our opponents basically have to lose 2 creatures in combat to block her. And again, at 17 cents, this is an easy budget consideration. Next up, we got Leyline of Abundance, which comes in just under our $2 mark. It's an enchantment for 2 green, and if it's in our opening hand, we can begin the game with it on the battlefield. It says whenever you tap a creature for mana, add an additional green, and pay 6 green, put a +1 counter on each creature you control. So like other Leylines, if we start off with it in our hand, this comes in free. And then with this deck, we're going to have a lot of creatures that are tapping for mana, so doubling that up is going to be huge. And on top of that, it gives us a place to dump all that mana to pump our team. Next up, let's talk about some upgrades that can untap our creatures with Copperhorn Scout coming in at 13 cents and Vitalize coming in at 37 cents. Copperhorn Scout is a 1/1 elf scout that costs a green, and when it attacks, we untap each other creature we control. So this can help us out in a multitude of ways. First off, this basically gives our other creatures pseudo-vigilance. Secondly, if we've tapped Mana Dorks for mana before combat, we basically get access to them again after combat. And of course, this can really help us take advantage of our commander's activated ability. And if we really want to focus on that and go down that route, Vitalize can be a great include as well. It's an instant for a green, and it says untap all creatures you control. So with a lot of Mana Dorks on the field, this is basically a ritual, or with our commander, it's a way to drain our opponents. Again, both of these cards are very budget friendly, so they should be able to fit into pretty much any budget. Next up though, let's talk about some ways to pump our elves in our team with Immaculate Magistrate, Elvish War Master, and Azuri Renegade Leader. Immaculate Magistrate comes in at 26 cents, and it's a 2/2 elf shaman that costs 3 and a green. We can tap it to put a +1 counter on target creature for each elf we control. So again, this works really well with our untap effects, and especially well with our commander. We use this to pump our commander hits a player, we get a ton of elves, then we pump our commander even further, then we get even more elves, and you see where this is going. And then Elvish War Master comes in at $1.23, and it can help us out in a variety of ways. It's a 2/2 elf warrior for 1 and a green. It says whenever one or more elves enter the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. This ability only triggers once each turn. And then by paying 5 green, elves we control get +2/+2 and gain death touch until end of turn. So first off, this can give us a ton of elves throughout the game. And secondly, we can utilize this to pump our team and make them even deadlier. And then Azuri Renegade Leader comes in just under that $2 mark at $1.79. Azuri is a 2/2 elf warrior that costs 1 green, and it has pay a green, regenerate another target elf, or pay 2 green, elf creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. Azuri is not only a fantastic commander in its own right, but it's also a fantastic addition to pretty much any elf tribal deck. Being able to regenerate any elf for just 1 mana is huge. And then that repeatable overrun effect for our team can be game-ending. Next up, let's talk about an elf that can help us out in a different way with Well-Wisher. Well-Wisher comes in at 84 cents, and it's a 1/1 elf for 1 and a green, and we can tap it to gain 1 life for each elf on the battlefield. In a deck like this can pad our life total to an absurd amount in no time. And again, in combination with untap effects, this can go even quicker. Next up, let's talk about a new card from Kaldheim with Skenfar Avenger, which comes in at $1.21. It's a 3/1 elf berserker that costs 1 and a black, and it says whenever another non-token elf or berserker you control dies, you draw a card and lose 1 life. 1 card for 1 life is absolutely nothing, and being able to replace the elves that we control that die is huge. But now let's move on to an elf that can help us out in a different way with Elvish Dreadlord. It comes in at 20 cents as a 3/3 zombie elf with death touch that costs 3 and a black. When it dies, non-elf creatures get -3/-3 until end of turn. And on top of that, it's got Encore for 5 black. So when this dies, this can take out a lot of our opponent's creatures, but if we encore it can pretty much take out all of them. And a one-sided tribal board wipe can be pretty good in a deck like this, especially for just 20 cents. But now let's take a look at one budget-friendly land that you might want to include with Orenreath the Vastwood. At 46 cents, it's a land that enters the battlefield tapped and taps for a green, and we can tap it to a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So yes, it is slower than a standard land, but it has a lot of upside. Again, this deck is going to be having a lot of green creatures enter the battlefield, so if we can just tap this and get them even bigger when they come in, that can be huge. Keep in mind this works especially well with our commander's tokens, as those tokens it creates are green. But now let's move on to the next category, where I'm going to highlight some cards that are between $2 and $10. These cards might be a bit pricier, but it might be worth stretching your budget just a bit to include some of them. So let's start things off with some more turn 1 plays with Boreal Druid, Deathrite Shaman, and Heritage Druid. Boreal Druid comes in just over $2 as a 1/1 elf druid that costs a green, and we can tap it to add colors to our mana pool. So it's just essentially another Llanowar elves that can tap for colorless mana. And again, the lower to the ground our mana curve is, the quicker this deck's gonna be. Next up, Deathrite Shaman comes in at $4.76, and it's a very flexible card. It's a 1/2 elf shaman that costs Golgari, and it has tap exile target land card from a graveyard, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Pay a black and tap it, exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, each opponent loses 2 life. And pay a green and tap it, exile target creature card from a graveyard, you gain 2 life. So this can ramp us, drain opponents, or help us gain life depending on the situation that we're in. And then Heritage Druid can really help us speed things up. It's a 1/1 elf druid that costs a green, and it has tap 3 untapped elves you control, add green to your mana pool. So this essentially lets us turn any 3 elves into mana dorks. And on top of that, it basically gets around summoning sickness since those elves aren't actually tapping themselves. So if you're willing to stretch your budget a bit, at $4.63, it's a fantastic include. Next up, in a somewhat similar way, Draga Treespeaker can basically turn all of our elves into mana dorks. At $4.58, she's a 1/1 elf druid that costs a green. But she's got level up for 1 and a green, and at levels 1 to 4, she taps for green. And then once you get her to level 5, all elves you control can tap for green. So once you can level her up, you can generate an absurd amount of mana with all of your elves. And speaking of an absurd amount of mana, there's Priest of Titania. At $4.54, she's a 1/1 elf druid that costs 1 and a green, and she can tap to add green to your mana pool for each elf on the battlefield. Yeah, that amount of mana can get out of hand really quickly. If you've got the budget for it, Priest of Titania might be one of the best includes that you can add into this deck. Speaking of a great include, though it's not quite as budget, there's Seedborn Muse coming in at $7.45. She's a 2/4 spirit that costs 3 green, and she has untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. Obviously, this can help with your mana dorks or your commander's ability, or basically everything. If you're looking for a more budget-friendly option that's just over $2, check out Quest Renewal. It's an enchantment for 1 and a green. It says whenever a creature you control becomes tapped, you may put a quest counter on Quest Renewal. And then as long as there are 4 more quest counters on Quest Renewal, untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step. With all the mana dorks that we have in this deck, it's going to take no time to get 4 counters on this. Now keep in mind that unlike Seedborn Muse, this just untaps our creatures, but still that can be incredibly impactful in this deck. Next up though, let's talk about some ways to pump our team with Elvish Champion, Draga Warcaller, and Beastmaster Ascension. Elvish Champion comes in at $4.35, and she's a 2/2 elf that costs 1 green. She has other elf creatures get ++1 and have Forest Walk, so she's a fantastic anthem that can help get our creatures through. Speaking of anthems, Draga Warcaller comes in at $3.95. He's a 1/1 elf warrior for a green, but he has multi-kicker for 1 and a green. It enters the battlefield with a ++1 counter on it for each time it was kicked, and then other elf creatures you control get ++1 for each ++1 counter on Draga Warcaller. So the more times that we kick this, the bigger our team gets. And of course, Beastmaster Ascension is always a good option as well, coming at $3.73. It's an enchantment for 2 and a green, and it says whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on Beastmaster Ascension. And then as long as Beastmaster Ascension has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. Attacking with 7 creatures is a very easy requirement for this deck, so we can get our creatures huge with this. But now let's talk about some cards that can help us with card advantage with Realm Walker, Guardian Project, and Elvish Harbinger. Realm Walker is a new card from Kaldheim, and it currently costs $2.53. It's a 2/3 shapeshifter with Changeling that costs 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and you may look at the top card of your library anytime, and you may cast creature spells of the chosen type from the top of your library. So this allows us to cast elves off the top of our library, and this can provide us an absurd amount of card advantage. Speaking of absurd card advantage, there's Guardian Project, which comes on the higher side of this range at $7.51. It's an enchantment for 3 and a green, and it says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. Basically, for the purposes of Commander, whenever a non-token creature comes into play under your control, draw a card. And then Elvish Harbinger helps us out in a different way, a 1/2 elf druid that costs 2 and a green. When she enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an elf card, reveal it, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it, and she can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So if you've got a specific powerful elf that you want to tutor up, this is the perfect option for you. That is, if you can squeeze her into the budget at $4.55. Next up, let's talk about another new card from Kaldheim with Haunting Voyage. It's a sorcerer for 4 black, but has a foretell cost of 5 black. It says choose a creature type, return up to 2 creature cards of that type from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell is foretold, return all creature cards of that type from your graveyard to the battlefield instead. So this is basically a one-sided Patriarch's Bidding where you're getting back all of your elves. A flexible mass reanimation spell is definitely worth adding in this deck if you can afford it at $5.88. Or you can just protect your creatures ahead of time with something like Heroic Intervention. At $6.15, it's an instant for 1 and a green, and it says permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So if you're looking to protect all your things, this is a very effective way to do it. Next up, let's move on to a land that's pretty much great in every elf deck with Wirewood Lodge. Coming in at $3.04, it's a land that can tap for a colorless, or you can pay a green and tap it to untap target elf. This works really well with this commander, as well as any elves that can tap for a lot of mana like Priest of Titania. And finally, another option that comes in just under our $10 threshold is Tyvar Kell. This is one of the new planeswalkers from Kaldheim, and it can fit right into this elf deck. Tyvar starts off at 3 loyalty and costs 2 green. He has elves you control have tap, add black. His +1 is put a ++1 counter on up to 1 target elf, untap it against death touch until end of turn. His 0 is create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. And his -6 is you get an emblem with whenever you cast an elf spell, it gains haste until end of turn and you draw 2 cards. So yeah, Tyvar essentially helps out in every imaginable way possible for this deck. But now let's move on to our final budget category, which I'm going to be calling the High Roller category. Cards in this category are going to be $10 or more. I'm just going to be highlighting a few, but these can definitely be high impact cards. Obviously, in any kind of a deck that's looking to make tokens, Parallel Lives, Primal Vigor, and Doubling Season are considerations. Parallel Lives is an enchantment for 3 and a green, and says if an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. Primal Vigor costs 1 more, and it basically does that, but for everyone, and it also says if 1 or more ++1 counters will be placed on a creature, twice that many ++1 counters are placed on that creature instead. And then Doubling Season has the same mana cost as Primal Vigor, but it's just for us. So it doubles up our tokens and it doubles up our counters. But again, although these cards are very effective, they are also quite expensive. Another incredibly effective but expensive card is Eladamri, Lord of Leaves. At $42.80, it's nearly as much as most of my decks. It's an old card, so I'm going to read the Oracle text. It's a 2/2 elf warrior that says other elf creatures have Forest Walk and other elves have Shroud. So this elf lord not only protects our elves, but it also helps them get through. So yeah, for 2 mana, this is a fantastic loot if you've got the budget for it. And then, of course, a fantastic finisher in a deck like this one is Craterhoof Behemoth. Coming in at nearly $40, it's a 5/5 beast with haste that costs 5 green. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Definitely a fantastic finisher for a lot of decks, including this one. And finally, I just want to bring up Allosaurus Shepherd, which is a whopping $85.51. It's a 1/1 elf shaman for a green, and it can't be countered, and green spells you control can't be countered. On top of that, for 4 green, until end of turn, each elf creature you control has base power and toughness 5/5 and becomes a dinosaur in addition to its other types. So yeah, Jumpstart didn't have that big of a print run, and this card is incredibly powerful, so that's why its price is all the way up there. It protects itself as well as a lot of your other spells, and it can be a finisher as well. But again, at nearly $90, this might cost more than the rest of your upgrades combined. Now you can find the links for all these upgrades in the description below. There are going to be 3 separate links, one for each budget category. So cards that are less than $2, cards that are between 2 and 10, and then cards that are over 10. Also in the description below, I included another link for potential cards to remove for some upgrades. Again, when you're adding cards into your deck and when you're taking cards out, there's a lot of factors to consider. It comes down to your playstyle, your personal preference, and your meta, so make the decisions that are right for you. There's absolutely no right or wrong way to upgrade a deck, so make the decisions that you want to make. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.